Hello, I am Amitabha Choudhury, a practicing urban designer and educator, currently based in Sydney, Australia. My undergraduate degree is in architecture, and I've since specialized in urban design. I've been working in the built environment for the last 25 years. My academic and professional journeys have taken me across 3 different countries, starting with my alma mater at CEPT, Ahmedabad, India, the ETH in Zurich in Switzerland, and UNSW in Sydney in Australia. These diverse experiences have informed my perspective on the legacy of modernism in the built environment, city making, and design pedagogy, especially in South Asia. I would like to emphasize that the views I express are personal and do not represent any organization I am or have been associated with. For today's talk, my focus is primarily about South Asian modernisms in city making and urban design, especially in India. It is an objective perspective, looking outside in, given my geographical distance from South Asia. However, this is not an external perspective, as my origins have provided me with an immersive experience growing up, being educated in, and working as a registered architect in India. I was privileged to have undertaken my architectural studies at the Center for Environmental Planning and Technology in Ahmedabad, India, a center of excellence in built environment studies. This university was established by Pritzker laureate B.V. Doshi over 50 years ago. The start of my undergraduate studies in 1989, CEPT Ahmedabad was still deeply committed to the modernist ethos. While the rest of the world was exploring the brave new domain of postmodernism, CEPT remained a bastion of modernist design sensibilities. Even a quarter of a century after Le Corbusier's passing, the spirit of modernism continued to permeate the design language and expression of student work. Architecture programs in South Asia primarily attract students from STEM backgrounds, resulting in a strong emphasis on applied scientific learning, as is a general practice in technical degrees in South Asia. While creative and critical thinking is encouraged in architecture programs, challenging established norms and hierarchies in the first years of the program is often difficult. Other factors, such as one's socio-cultural background, the academic institution attended, geographic location within the subcontinent, and fluency in English as a second language, play pivotal roles in shaping one's awareness of South Asian modernisms. South Asian architectural education still has a significant content of modernism in its curricula, with precedents and reading lists still including 20th century modernist references and the study of South Asian modern masters. This shapes architectural awareness and, by extension, expression in the built environment. With the arrival of new ideas such as postmodernism, contextual regionalism, and deconstructivism, despite a slight delay in reaching South Asian shores, these movements did challenge modernist norms and were as influential as in their rationale as their aesthetic sensibilities. Alongside the strong rationalism that distinguishes South Asian modernism, like its Western counterpart, by the 1970s and 80s, there was also a parallel stream of empirical precedent, especially in city making and urban design. At CEPT, as in several schools of architecture in India, there is an emphasis of documenting settlements and structures and complexes of heritage value in the form of related study programs. These require students to draw villages and settlements, urban neighborhoods, heritage structures, and institutions. And for many urban middle-class students, this was often their first experience of rural and regional India, an eye-opener in many ways that the formal education didn't quite prepare them for. There was also a strong emphasis on architectural history, both of the subcontinent and the world, as well as an awareness of the local build tradition and techniques. My undergraduate thesis looked at the distinctions of urban form within the city of Calcutta, now Kolkata, The above figure ground diagrams were all drawn to the same scale, the traditional quarter of North Calcutta, the colonial quarter, and as a comparison, the contemporary planned quarter of Salt Lake to the east of Calcutta. After graduating in architecture, this was the first project I worked in. It was a project by B.B. Doshi, but which he had done in association with Mandala Design Services, who I worked for. Udayana Condovel was a joint venture with the government of West Bengal and a private developer, and basically providing subsidized housing in lieu of open market high-end condominiums. Now, it was an interesting project to be involved with because you saw the dynamics of what happened in the real world. And one of the things that I also realized that the idea of modernism was a vision of the good life. A more homogeneous international style of modernism provided clarity, consistency, and a sense of purpose, especially when compared to the vast diversity of South Asian cultural traditions, especially in the post-colonial context. It is my observation, however, that while South Asian privileged and educated middle class embraced modernism for their homes, institutions, and in some instances, entire cities like Chandigarh and Bhubaneswar, they represented a minority. And like a lot of other architects, my first project was my family home, my parents' residence in Salt Lake, Calcutta, built in 2000. Again, if you say effectively the style is very modern. I did attempt to go and look at the contextual realities, but by no means is it a traditional house form. And after I did my master's, I worked in Australia in a firm, Dixon Rothschild, and one of their projects was the detailed design documentation for Terminal 3 in the New Delhi International Airport. Now, that was an interesting experience working across continents, learning to understand how you work when there are, large transport hubs in South Asia. Little things like the brief about departure areas are designed very differently. There are lots of people seeing off other people, and it was overscaled to really go and reflect, the 25 million passengers expected to use the terminal. But there was also aspects like tolerance in building design, the use of new materials, etc. So that was an interesting experience, and looking at both sides of how an evolving India in a liberalized India, how it was sort of going ahead and making bold stances, but was it entirely adhering to the modernist tradition? That's open to question. There is a gap between the design ethos in the university campus and professional practice. And this often is illustrated when someone who's not design literate or not educated in design comes to, say, a university like CEPT. And the first question is the campus still unfinished? The notion of these exposed brick buildings is something that sort of triggers this sense of it's not quite finished yet. So there's this understanding and an explanation to be done. So whatever comes clearly to the people trained in modernism, often it is not as clear to the others. So there seems to be a gap between public perception and what the trained professionals think. And I also believe South Asian modernism struggled to relate to life on the street beyond the high boundary wall and privacy planting, screening a very controlled space within. This remains a challenge in terms of city making in India. The reality of life on the street is often complex, dynamic, and challenging. There is often a tendency to turn one's back on this reality and seek solace, whether be it in walled gardens or enclosed courtyards. The detached bungalow or institution that sits in a screened landscape grounds tends to be an easier approach than one which engages with the street and its human experience. And there is this precedent, both from pre-colonial times as well as colonial times, at the Governor's Palace in Calcutta. The Metcalfe's Hall, again, one of the colonial buildings, which has been repurposed for uh, other uses. But if you see the language of building, it's this high sense of security, where the object, the artifact is distant from the street, and there are layers of security before you can go in. And it is by no means the only place. This is the British Commission in New Delhi, and that is pretty representative of Lutinda's Delhi, the gated bungalow. And this has sort of been associated with the vision of the good life. So modernism, I think, does have this dilemma in terms of where it stands with the reality of India and what is essentially a very low-density expanded urban fabric construct. And sometimes these goes into an art form. This is Lutyens' design for the boundary wall of the Viceregal Palace, now the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where the president lives. And it takes on strange mutations in its expression. This is a building in Calcutta, and in fact, there's a bus stop named after it with such a landmark. But in terms of the traditional city, this is Rani Sipri's mausoleum in the walled city of Ahmedabad, a heritage listed building, but it coexists very much with its contemporary context. And there is probably more of an engagement with the street. Walled gardens and courtyards are nothing new in India, but I think this engagement with outer life on the street is more pronounced in that the greater built tradition. And this is one of the few examples where B.V. Doshi designed Prema Bhai Hall in the main town square of Ahmedabad, which again does sit directly on the square and does engage with it directly. And this is the nature of life in India, the town square, pedestrian areas, which has a lot layers of history of old heritage buildings and contemporary ones. These are not necessarily landmark buildings, but they all fit in and create that urban space, the space between buildings. And this is also seen in the newer parts of Ahmedabad, the CG Road, which goes ahead and looks at this direct engagement with the street. There's a sense of display or of wares, of movement, and it does go ahead and do it more naturally. And I think modernism struggles to do that in India. A few projects which have gone and done it differently: City Centre Mall in Salt Lake, Kolkata by Choudhury, the hybrid of big box retail mall, crossed with the traditional market street that's sheltered from the elements. And it has created very successful gathering spaces within the complex. Now, the juxtaposition of mechanized construction and the crafts tradition, the prominence of concrete as building material and glass and steel, and the adaptation of traditional techniques into hybrid arrangements have been hallmarks of South Asian modernists. These architects have played a pivotal role in developing well-crafted buildings, right from concepts down to the detailing of it. And South Asian modernists have had the advantage of drawing inspiration from a rich built tradition and context, allowing them to build tradition and modernity in their designs, but they often tend to be in high-end projects. This is Ganga Kutir, Raj upon Ganges, a resort. It was designed by Sri Lankan architect Chandra Basawate, and it might be questioned about, what does Sri Lanka have to do with Bengal, but there has been obviously an attempt made to relate it climatically in terms of the landscape, the planting palette, and the way, the roof forms, etc. work. So there is an attempt that is obviously work in progress. And South Asian modernism finds itself at the crossroad beyond academia and high-end design practices. The legacy of South Asian modernism is mixed. Many modern structures, often found in low-density affluent residential areas or specific institutions and civic facilities, are considered outdated and have been either identified for removal or have been demolished to make way for more contemporary replacements. Now, this is Charles Korea's Navrangpura Stadium, which now faces likely demolition. The majority of South Asia's built environment remains a complex amalgamation of tradition and modernity, opportunistically employed. especially in places like my hometown in Shillong, Meghalaya, a hill town in northeast India. The transition from traditional construction methods of light timber frame structures in a seismic zone with reed and rattan infill and East Asian roof forms to composite flat roof structures with reinforced concrete frames and masonry infill have significantly impacted the form settlements across the region. Change is inevitable, but it is often unpredictable and at times challenging. This change, seen in Shillong, will also occur in cities, towns, and settlements across South Asia. South Asian modernism will continue to be adapted and reused. And so, in conclusion, I believe modernism in South Asia has evolved in a relatively short period of time, rather like Darwin's finches, shaped by rationalism, as well as the unique needs of climate, culture, affordability, and place. Thank you.